Well, here we go again, back to the Camaro. Life kind of got in the way, so I haven't been able to do anything on this. We got snow the day before Christmas, and down here in southern Ontario, that gives everybody a heart attack. I'm from about 3 hours north of here, so my gauge on snow is once it's over top of your winter running shoes, then you have to do something about it. So that's not a problem. I go out, get the snowblower. It was running about a month ago when I checked it, and of course it won't start. So I screw around with that for probably 10 minutes and finally figure, well, I better go into the shop and we'll pull the plug out of this thing and strip her down to the axle, because what else do you do? So just as I started to take the plug out, I thought, I wonder what'll happen if I turn the ignition switch on. Amazing how that works. Anyway, thought I'd give you a little history, a little more history on this thing before I get carried away. The Weather Network, like you can believe them, says next week's going to be my weather window to paint. So this thing's got to get all scuffed, masked, and ready to go. So when this thing came to me, like I said before, it's been through 4 different people. 3 of them were licensed bodymen. This trunk section, the owner had bought a brand new, complete, full trunk pan for it. And I guess they figured out there's no way to get a trunk pan in here unless you pull the tail panel out of the car. So what they did is the frame rails run right along here. So they took a brand new, complete trunk, cut the sides off of it right down the center of the frame rails on both sides, dropped it in, and then why they didn't keep the extras and weld them back on, I don't know, but all they did is overlapped and welded flat sheet all the way out to the inner side of the quarter panels. Now underneath, you probably won't be able to see it, but you'll be able to see these 2 holes. And underneath of there is a piece of 12 gauge which welds across like this. And it's actually a mount for the weights which go in all 4 corners of this car. And that's the top mount for it there. I don't know whether the coupes have the weights in the corners or not, but I do know what they're for in the convertible. Everybody thinks they're in there for traction because these are such a powerhouse. But the reality is what they're in there for is they're a harmonic balancer, so that when you're going down the road and you cross over a railway track, is the weights help stop the windshield frame from shaking. That's how rigid these cars are. So anyway, what I did is I split, again, the trunk pan that they put in. I split it down the center of the frame rails all the way up to the seat back, because all this section here had just been cobbled in and there was nothing, no flange to carry it around the wheelhouse. So I made the piece to come down plus these floor extensions, and then this outer edge is the floor drops, and these drops actually are a 90 degree, which I'll show you in a minute, and go down and carry the bottom of the quarter panel. So we'll have a quick look at them. So without those drops being in place, what they had done is they'd left the old ones hanging in there, what was left of them, and welded along the bottom to the pieces that weren't rotten. If you take a look at the bottom of this thing while we're laying down here, because I don't want to do it twice, I'm getting old, the bottom looks as good as the top does. And while we're down here in the floor, when they originally put these quarter panels on, not these ones, the original, or the second set I guess you would say, what they did is this is a pinch weld, this seam. And instead of actually doing it the right way, is they took and they flattened that pinch weld out and welded it all along over top of the tail panel. Well, the problem is trying to cut that off. First of all, you lose your pinch weld totally. You lose the flange. You've got nothing to go with. And you chew all the material out of the ends of the tail pan. So I ended up just cutting them both off, putting a complete tail pan in, and replacing the quarters. So when they did the original quarter replacement, what they did is they cut the original quarters about 2 inches down below this body line. And they used similar, I think they're called an 80% quarter, which rolls up over the top of this body line about halfway in, comes up to the front, and rolls around this corner. So with this being cut off, somewhere down in this area here, they've got way too much metal. The quarter panel wants to sit high. So the only cure for that, in their eyes, is you just take a great big ball peen hammer and you just pound the snot out of this section of the quarter all the way down. And the problem with that is when they did it, they beat it so hard that it actually stretched these inside edges of the trunk lip and rolled them over to the side. So when I took all this off, there was about between a half an inch and 3/4 of an inch of a thing called Metalux, which is actually aluminum powder floated in fiberglass resin. So once that was chewed all out, we found out how deep these have been caved in. This side I managed to bring back up and roll it back straight. The other side I actually had to cut that lip all the way out and make a new piece to make it all join. Up the front's no different. This is a factory body line with a pinch weld again. Problem there again is they took and they beat that flange flat, welded it over top of the quarter panel, and then just filled it full of mud and tapered it all towards the front. So there was no saving those quarter panels. The inners and the outers were both rotten from somewhere in this area here, and then around all the outer edges, which they had scabbed pieces in and then folded down and welded to the inside of the lip. And of course the problem there is you've got to get this piece to let go of the quarter to be able to replace the quarter. To do that, you've pretty much destroyed everything that's here that they had put in, even though it was cobbled up junk anyway. So we ended up just cutting the quarters, cutting the inner and the outer wheelhouse, and starting over. So with the new quarters, this is a 90% quarter, which means you get the B-pillar with the quarter panel. I could not get a full quarter for the convertible roof. And as I said about the flange being beaten flat, the reason they did that, it's pretty black in there, is you have to actually reach down inside this hole with one arm and then try and see through your hand down through the slot where the window goes, where you're welding that onto the top of the rocker. It is a bit of fun. Anyway, I should have taken the hint. I should have known when this thing came here. After we rolled it off the trailer, the next day when I come out and looked at it, and the doors wouldn't open. But anyway, we got our doors hanging right. All the gaps along the rockers, up the fenders. You won't be able to see where the cowl cheeks are welded in. But on this subframe, what they had done is there's a mount back in here which goes up into the seat brace, and the second mount up in here which goes up into the torque box, which is welded to the firewall. And that subframe, where both those mounts were completely rotted out. So they had pulled the subframe out of the car, and what they had done is welded pieces of 1/4 inch plate on top of the subframe in both of those mounts. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it better on top or not. But the problem that created is you've now changed the geometry of where that subframe sits in relation to the car. And you've really dropped everything down 1/4 inch. So on GMs, you're mounted off the rad support and you're mounted off the firewall. So when you do that, and dropping the subframe down, what it does is it tips the whole front end of the car down. The other problem was the torque boxes, or what was left of them, weren't mounted to anything. He had bought 2 floor halves that split down the center of the tunnel, left and a right half. And the only thing that I could find that they used out of those 2 floor halves was over on the driver's side, where it goes into the toe panel. The rest they must have just thrown away, because all they did is they welded flat sheet steel over top of the existing rotten floor. And the problem is with that as well, is they only tacked it around the outside edges. So actually the center of the 2 floors were moving freely of each other, allowing the body to flex. So this floor pan has been replaced up into somewhere up in about that area at the bottom of the heater box, which behind here is where the torque boxes mount, so we're all in solid there. And I cut the 1/4 inch plate that they had welded into the subframe, made my own pieces, which sit flush with the subframe, so that we're on the right plane to mount the front end. It's difficult to see, but down in here is the inner rocker panel, which runs front to back of the car. And in these cars, and especially the convertibles, the only thing that really holds this car together is the inner and outer rockers. When it came here, there was tar from the floor pan back to somewhere about the A-pillar. There was nothing in there. So eventually, if this thing hadn't came here, let's say, it would have folded in half at some point. I've had to do some rethinking on how I'm going to spray this thing, because usually I don't spray a complete car all in one chunk. I always do in pieces, fenders, doors, hoods. I am going to take the doors off and the hood off, but other than that it's going to be all sprayed in one chunk. So I've made what I think is going to be able to handle the amount of airflow that I want. So this week we'll get this thing apart. We will get it all scuffed. I'll maybe do a quick video on that. Pretty boring. Who wants to watch sanding? And the week after says the temperatures are supposed to be on the plus side here. So we'll get it painted. Anyway, catch you next time. Thanks for watching.